Hey, this is Brookes. I've got some time, I've got an idea, and I've got a cup of coffee. So let's talk about why my comic failed.
Now, this character is the main character from a comic called Denizen that I was doing a few years ago. And Denizen, I consider a failure. So I wanted to go back and figure out, sort of do a post-mortem on the comic and figure out what it is or why it was that the comic didn't do well and why it was I didn't finish it. So starting sort of 10,000 feet up, I initially got the idea for Denizen a little bit after we were married. And for some reason, I felt like at that point I was either qualified, which is sort of silly, or just finally interested in doing some kind of story that had a romantic aspect to it. And I've always loved the wanderer archetype, the sort of character that's got nothing but what's on their back, maybe a loner, and perhaps is out either running away from something or helping others completely independently. And so combining those two ideas, I thought, what if you had a wanderer who wasn't running away from something, but running to someone, or running to something? So there was a story between this Denizen character and his lady friend, and at one point the villain character, who is his friend, gets jealous, flies him out into the middle of nowhere, and the gem around his neck that contained all of his memories, basically everything was drained into that gem and then broken. And so you have the character start the story with no memory. And that was one of the biggest problems with this story, and kind of the primary one, is that the main Denizen character didn't have his memories for basically the entire story. Which kind of leaves you to go, well, what is the motivation for this character? And why am I supposed to care about them? And there was also a lot of logistical problems with getting him back home. You know, why would he do that? Or how would he do that? Or for what reason would he journey back home? So that was one of the main things. I did a lot of world building when it came to the area where they were from, this sort of medieval fantasy setting, with everything being really simplistic except for the technology that came from these gems. So that's something I've learned a lot about since then, is storytelling isn't so much something that people like or care about because you're stringing them along with a mystery. And that's really what this ended up being, without a very good resolution or reason for people to keep looking into it or following the story. Another thing too was artistically I just didn't have the chops to do this justice. One of the weird stylistic choices I was making was coloring all of the line art purple, which worked with certain pages because of the overall color palette of that page. But then you get to something that wasn't so much a cool color, maybe a set of tans and browns on a page, and it really started to clash. I also was fairly busy around the time of the release of this comic, not so much the first comic, or the first chapter, which I released all at once, but trying to make it a weekly updated webcomic where I was publishing a new page every week. Well, I had so many projects going on that doing that page justice wasn't possible at all. So oftentimes I was rushing something out that I really wasn't happy with. Another kind of funny thing with Denizen, something that I couldn't really render very well because it wasn't thought out well enough, or maybe it was too well thought out. It was kind of too complicated. He had a tool with him that was a combination of 3 different things. It was a shield he could wear, like a buckler on his arm, the way that I'm doing it in this illustration. It was also something that deployed out into a unicycle he could ride around on. That was pretty cool. But then also third, it was a banjo with the strings and everything deploying out from another end too. So just really overcomplicated, and something that I didn't end up rendering very well. It wasn't very thought out. And it was kind of, it's a good metaphor, I think, for the project overall. It was a lot of elements thrown together that might have thrived better on their own. But just for the sake of everything being cool and everything being there all together, I kept throwing things together. And that's something I think I've learned from, storytelling-wise. There's a couple elements from the Denizen story that I've retained and carried over to new characters. Koji, for example, is a bard who carries around that banjo and is a bit of a wanderer type character himself, but he's just a bard. He's not 18 different things. You need to have a character that audiences can quickly understand and learn about, because multifaceted people are interesting, but oftentimes they're hard from a storytelling perspective for people to really understand all the way. As far as where I stand now with this project, honestly, it's fun to look back on what went wrong and what failed. It's not something I get down about or sad about. I'm forward thinking. The quote that comes to mind, especially with this project, is one that's been reiterated by Getting Over It with Bennett Foddy and Leslie Knope, but it's originally from Mary Pickford. It's, "This thing that we call failure is not the falling down, but the staying down." Like I said, there's a few things that I was able to pull directly into other stories, but overall, indirectly, I learned a lot about storytelling and making comics, and a lot of things I've been able to carry into my next comic project called Parcel, and the first issue of that is going to be available really soon. It's something I'm working really hard on right now, and I can't wait for you to see it. I'm going to be making this illustration, the working file, available for Patreon backers at the Novice Bard tier, speaking of Koji. And at that tier, you also get something I've introduced recently, which is a personalized video critique, about 5 minutes, from me on your work, about your work, the things that you can be doing to improve, the things that are going well for you right now. So that's something that's really exciting. I've been happy to make those for people and help directly. So if you're interested, head over to patreon.com/bageldenizen. And if you'd like to see the final work that I do, you can go to instagram.com/bageldenizen or @bageldenizen on Instagram. And bageldenizen is my username on Twitter and Twitch as well. Thank you so much for watching, and have fun creating.